tonight you're here for how to get your garden going, or if you already have your garden started, then you will be interested probably in local resources and talking about seed sources and things like that and what's up in Veg Club. So we have a couple of announcements first. One is anybody an orchardist? You can just, you've got some fruit trees. You can just unmute and yell yes if you do.
Trying.
I know you do. You're trying? Yep. Okay.
Yes,
well,
I do.
Information. Oh yeah, you do. Yes. That's John McInnes, I hear, right?
Yes.
Yes. Didn't you graft like 100 trees?
Yeah, and I participate in the Kitsap harvest, and one of the sessions was yesterday on grafting. So yeah, I have about 75 grafted trees over the years.
Wow, that is amazing. That's great. And a lot of us have one or two trees. You might be interested in what mason bees or leaf cutter bees. And I don't know as much about this actual opportunity as John does. But this is not John McInnes, but John Fawcett, our tech host tonight. Can you tell us about the rentmasonbees.com opportunity that people have?
Yeah, I'm going to put the contact info in the chat right now before I start. And it's an island, so it's a Rent Mason Bees is there's a representative on Bainbridge Island who, if you contact her, she'll set you up with leaf cutter bees and mason bees. The mason bees start earlier. I think it's April, May, and then the leaf cutter bees come out when we're in the 70s. You pay a little extra for those. It's not very expensive, and you get pollinators right in your yard. And the neat thing about them is you don't have to worry about getting stung. They're not aggressive.
And if you do rent them, people often get them from the nursery, but then they have to clean them up and think about whether or not there are mites and disease in it, right? In the cocoons and things like that. When they store them, they have to clean them up and store them over winter in their fridge. This company cleans everything really well, right? And just returns to you these mason bee cocoons that you put in your garden, and then they're ready to come out again. True?
Absolutely true. Yes. That's part of the fee that you pay. So you get a block, you get a little house, you change out your blocks, you just put it in a sunny spot in your yard near your gardens. It's super easy to set up. I'm not tremendously green thumbish, so it's good to have things easy for me. My wife can figure this stuff out. It's a little more challenging for me. And I think Phaedra is, I think her name's Phaedra. I'm drawing a blank, but if you email info@rentmasonbees.com, she'll reach
Phaedra
back
Elliott?
I don't know what her last name. No, not Phaedra.
No. Okay, I thought she has a lot of hats.
No, different person.
Okay, all right. Okay. Well, let's see what else we have going on. There's also a Bainbridge Island Fruit Club. There's a link for this and the Rent Mason Bees on the resource page. Although, John, if you have her individual info, I'm going to need to put that on the paper. If you could email it to me. But Bainbridge Island Fruit Club can help you with orchardist stuff too, even if you just have one tree. And the resource page that you have a link to, that you will get a link to, has a link for the fruit club, and they are doing a lot of stuff about grafting and caring for fruit trees and things like that, including a class about general orchard care that's coming up in, I think it's March, and it's going to be at Fahey. And yeah, you can look at that link. So let's see, back to the veg. So this is the schedule for Veg Club for this year. I know once you put a lot of words on the screen that nobody can listen and read at the same time, but all of these things are in the resource page as well. Now, this resource page I'm talking about is linked in the chat right now, and every once in a while, John will bump it forward in the chat so that you'll be able to see it without having to go back. And I'll refer to it a lot. Let's see. Okay, so after tonight, this is what I think you're going to be able to do. Find your best garden space, even if you don't have any garden space at your house. And choose which kind of beds you need. And then know when it's time to dig. And find suppliers of seeds adapted to thrive here, because it's not the same as the rest of the country. Also, be able to read a seed catalog to find the best varieties for our area, and know when to plant each crop here with a very good calendar that I particularly like for this area, and it's very specific. And then how to get your plants big, because new gardeners sometimes find that their plants don't grow as successfully, and I want it to be successful for you. So I'll give you some tips. And experienced growers, as I go through these things, if you want to chime in, I know you're supposed to be muted, but you're welcome to say, Carol, call my name a couple of times, and say, I think actually it's the opposite of what you just said. I don't agree with that, or I do the opposite, or I have something else to tell you about this. That would be great. And the last thing apparently on my list is use my list of resources for lots of things. So, oh yeah, your resource page. I'll show you the resource page right now. So it has a little list of things that you can do if you're wondering, what do I do first in the spring? But almost everything I talk about is on here. So you see this? It is 9 pages long. So that is a lot of material that you can get hold of in the resource page. And let's see. First, we're going to talk about where you're going to put your garden. So you are going to have to decide where in your yard you're going to put it. So here's my tiny quiz for you. And the answer, of course, is D. But the reason I put this up is, thank you, John, my laugh track. The reason I put this up is sometimes we aren't confident when we're designing the yard, and we think, maybe I'll have a garden sometime, but I don't deserve to have one in its most successful spot because I don't know. So I'll just put it wherever I can fit it. Or we get excited about the sport court and the patio and the barbecue party area and stuff, and whoever's helping us figure out where things go, they don't hear from us that we would love to have a vegetable garden and fruit or whatever. So when you know that ahead of time, even if you can't do it, but you know you want to do it, then it can change where you put things and the priority that you have. And I say this because I am asked to rescue gardens that are basically in the shade a lot. And they just want me to tell them what fertilizer they can put on so things grow better, but they just don't have enough light. So you might want to, I'm just inviting you to think about it. And how do you figure out where your sun is? You do a thing called sun mapping. So this is sort of pretend sun map. But you can see I have lots of hatch marks here, and I've noted that it stays damp. And that means that on my map of my house, I'm not going to put my veg here because it's very shady and dark. And you can see that on the north side of trees, we get extra shade because our sun points, most of the year it comes at us from the south. The south wall of a house is very warm, and that's a great place for plants that want heat, like tomatoes and things. I put 5 hours here because I'd like to point out that it actually, if I look out my window into my front yard at 8 o'clock, I see sun. And at 4 o'clock, I see sun. But that doesn't mean I have 8 hours of sun out there, because we have these tall trees. So they make this sort of, column of sun, and then it moves across your garden. So it's useful to look at it and watch, when does it start, when does it end in any area. So I'll show you the traditional way to do it is to, every 2 hours, you go outside. So this is a map, this is a house, and the garden around it. You go outside and you either shade or you make hatch marks So at 8 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 4 o'clock, 6 o'clock, and wherever has the least number of hatch marks is where you can put your garden. This is my fabulous tomato area when I get to plant tomatoes there. So this means that you don't have to do it all in one day. You can do it, the morning hours, and then a few days later you check it at midday and stuff like that. But you do have to have a sunny time of year. And if you want to know now, it's going to be kind of difficult, especially since we get less sun this time of year. But it's legitimately until a few years ago, the way people did it. And you still can do. You can just sketch it out. Or you can take photos. I have a 2-story house, so I can just like point the camera down at the yard. And this person has discovered that they only have a couple of hours of sun in this space, so probably not ideal. And again, you don't have to do this all on the same day, but within the same week, it would be good. So you do 8 and 10, and then you have to leave your house. And then you do noon and 2 sometime when you're home. And then some afternoon, you're home a couple of days later, and you do 4 and 6, and you see what's sunny and what's not. But if it's cloudy and you really want to get going on this, and you don't already have a real idea of, I know exactly where the sunny spot is in my yard, you can also use an app. You download them onto your phone, and you could do it in the middle of the night. It's a little bit difficult in the middle of the night. You could do it on a cloudy day, I'll say, and they will show you where the sun is going to be. So this person, oops, I have to go back. See if I can get back there. There we go. This person has stood where her garden is going to be, where she hopes it will be. She's trying to decide on a couple of places. So she stood there and she pointed at her camera with the app on at the sky and moved it around. And she saw these suns. There's also a sun down here, but do you see that it's over the tree? That means that the sun at 7 a.m. will be behind that tree, and for where she's standing won't get any sun. But then from 8 to 11, this place gets sun. So now she knows it gets 2 hours of sun. Oh, 3 hours of sun, I can count. There's another version. So this one's called Lumos. And this one's called Sunseeker over here. It's very similar. It doesn't show you suns. But here, this one you can see was done at April 7th, on April 7th. And this is the path of the sun coming down to set on April 7th. But it also tells you that at the solstice, this is the longest day of the year, this person's going to get sun there well past 7, maybe past 8 o'clock. So it shows you how long your sunlight's going to be. These are linked on your resource page. Does anybody have anything to say about these? Like you used one of these apps and it was awful? Okay,
yes.
good news.
Yes.
Oh, tell me about it. Yes, John.
Okay, so when you're talking about the sun and the power of the sun, are we looking at a specific time, like anytime before 8 a.m., not too concerned about it because the sun's too low, and anytime after 6 p.m. because it's already low again? Or do we just care if it's sun, it's sunny?
We like it to be sunny during the middle portion of the day. So I wouldn't probably, if I got to choose something that's sunny from 10 to 4, I would like that over something that's sunny from, in the summer from 5 a.m. to 9 or something like that, or 11. There are some plants that love morning sun, like peas, like cool weather, and lettuce likes it. So if you end up having a garden that has some hot spots and some cooler spots or morning sun spots where they get those morning hours of sun, but it's not as hot, then we tend to put plants like peas and lettuce in those areas. And we tend to put the heat lovers in other spots. But the more sun, I would say around here, in my experience, the more sun, the better. It's not like California Central Valley where it's 110 degrees. I once had my peppers cook on the plants. So we don't get that here. Does anybody disagree? Beth Bayless, you're a landscape architect. Do you agree with this or not? Beth, are you around? She's wandered off. Oh no, she's there. Oh, well. Okay. Let's see what else. Yeah, you're in front yard. It's okay if your front yard's your best spot. I have veg in my front yard and then, other places too, but I definitely have some veg in my front yard. There's a lot of veg in front yards around here. As you get to get to know what vegetables look like, you'll be walking the dog and go, that's cabbage and kale, and that's pumpkin plants. And people do use it in their front yard landscapes. Can look really good. Here are 3 examples. If you live in a place that has a CC&R about things being very curbed up and tidy, you can build boxes around it if you want to. It gives structure and what's called evidence of care. Like even if the plants, they're ripening and they're really productive, but they look a little sloppy, if you have that structure around them, it can help observers or your neighbors or whoever it is who's concerned about it understand that you have some structure to that. But you don't have to. You can put them in the ground like this right here, and that is all vegetables right there. And if you really are a visual arts kind of person and you'd like it to be gorgeous and to incorporate other things in art or family play space or something like that, you can get hold of a book by Nikki Jabor. It's a great book, Groundbreaking Food Gardens it's called, and there's a link to it. Yeah, so this is ways to create artistic food gardens if you want to. Mine is not an artistic food garden. Mine is literally beds in the ground, but I can't tell you the number of people who walk up just like delivering something or coming to ask me a question or something, and they go, oh, I can't believe this is such a pretty garden. But that's because food growing in any way looks really good. I mean, it kind of is primordially satisfying to us, I think, in my opinion. Oh, yeah. So that's just a plain old bed full of food right there. And it looks happy. Okay. So this comes to your question, John, about do we want hot sun or do we, how many hours do we want? It's great. If you have 10 hours of sun in the middle of the day, then I think you're in great luck. Many, many plants want that sun. And the ones that don't, you can always give them a little bit of shade, but it's hard to make sun where there isn't any. But let's look at if you have a garden that has 4 hours in one spot and then like 6.5 in another spot, or maybe 8 in another spot, you can put your garden in more than one place and you can grow different things there. And we do actually end up having to move our vegetables around, which is kind of a pain. That's for another class. But if you have more than 6 hours, you might want to reserve that space. If your space is limited and you just have one area with more than 6 hours, you might want to put any of these things in there. Now look, almost all of these bear seeds when we're eating them. So tomatoes and eggplants and peppers have seeds inside. Basil, not so much, but corn is actually just made of seeds, right? So almost all of these are fruits, and corn is a grain, but things that bear fruits need a lot of photons in order to do that. Photons are like units of light. Because if you think about these guys compared to a piece of lettuce, the lettuce, all it has to do is get enough light to grow like 20 leaves. But the tomato has to grow leaves, tons of leaves, so that it can collect enough sugars to build itself a tomato. That tomato does not take in much sunlight. It's not self-nourishing. It has to get all the sugars and everything that's in it from the leaves. So the plant has to build this big plant before it can bother to make a tomato or an eggplant or a pepper. So that's why those things want lots of light and longer hours if you have them. And they generally like heat as well. At least what we call heat around here, warmth. But if you have less, if you have fewer hours, like 4 to 6 hours, leafy and rooty things, you can see here, can tolerate cooler spots and afternoon shade. but yeah. And I think I put this on the resource page, but you can always take a screenshot. And if you have 3 to 4 hours, I'm going to invite you, if you really want to grow in your garden, and your garden is pretty darn shady, so you just have 3 to 4 hours of sun. I think one option is to experiment with plants in your garden and become an expert on what grows in your garden in those few hours of sun. Another thing that I would have you do, if you want a big, bountiful garden that you have pictured in your mind, I would definitely do your garden, but you might also look for, where can I put a gigantic half-barrel pot on the other side of my house? Or can I get a pea patch plot? I'll tell you about that in a little while. Only if you're thinking of, I want to grow corn, I want to grow pumpkins and things like that. But in 3 to 4 hours, these plants that are listed, which you note are mostly leafy and a little bit of roots, will tolerate the part shade. They're gonna grow slower. And when they grow slower, sometimes we think they're in shade and they're not growing, they don't need much water. But if the roots get dry, then they're more susceptible to something called powdery mildew. And we see it and we go, mildew, they must be too wet, because mildew is about wetness, right? So I better water them less, and then it gets worse. And they water them less and it gets worse. And then you say, I give up. So they do need consistently, appropriately moist roots, not soaking wet waterfall, but I would not forget to water them when the soil is dry, within, and half an inch of the surface maybe. And I would keep mulch on the ground around them. Does anybody grow in shade now, in part shade, like 3 hours of sun? Apparently not. Okay. If you have no garden space, or you have, the part shade. Oh, Beth Bayless, tell us what's up. Beth, you raised your hand. Okay. So if you just want more space, or you have no garden space, you might want a pea patch. A pea patch is not named after the vegetable, the pea. It's named after the Picardo family that's in Seattle. They are one of the first families to say, we've got a lot of land and we want to share it with people. We want to open it to the community and let people have plots of property called plots of gardening space. So here are a bunch of them. I have 5, I think, that are on Bainbridge, and that's partly because that's my haunt and where I hang out. But I have several in the rest of the county, and if anybody knows of another one, if you could mention it in the chat, that would be really great, if you don't see it on my list. So let's see if this will move. Huh. Okay. I actually need to go up one. Okay, this is Wacky Nut Farm on Bainbridge South End. And this farm, whoops, sorry about that. The beds in the middle are tended by individuals. So each person gets one of those beds. The flowers on the left are communally grown. So you have to put a certain amount of time in addition to tending your own garden, where you are weeding or deadheading or something like that. Or you might be on the fruit team instead, and the fruit is in the right side of the picture. And so the fruit and the flowers are cooperatively tended, and then people have their own individual beds. In this one in particular, they don't let, last I talked to him anyway, they don't let someone in who is a brand new gardener. Many places will, but Wacky Nut wants you to intern first. So you help somebody in their bed and you learn about it. And then once you've learned, then you get to have a bed. But the links for these are on the resource page. Huh. Got that moving. My computer's not doing what I want it to. There's also Rock Farm on the south end. Look at that sunny stuff. And this one's in the middle. This is Johnson Farm. And the links are there. often you get tools. You might get a big access to compost and especially knowledge from the gardeners who are gardening right next to you. So both of these are in the middle, are in town in Winslow of Bainbridge. This is Red Pine Park near the pub. And this is behind the First Congregational Church. You can see it right there. And they have waiting lists quite often. I'll tell you, Rock Farm in the previous slide, Rock Farm right there, she wants me to tell you, she's got space. Somebody left and she has space, and ordinarily she cuts the signups off in January, but for you, special deal, you get to come in. If you get a hold of her, you can ask her for some of that space in which to garden, and you generally get some guidance and shared tools and things like that. So there we have this one's in Winslow. This is on the left, that's Robb Park in Paulsbo. On the right, that's Blueberry Park in Bremerton. Right, it is Bremerton. Correct me if I'm wrong. This one is
Yeah, it's Bremerton.
Wilkinson. Oh, sorry, Blueberry Park, are you saying, John?
Yes, it's Bremerton, East Bremerton.
Great. Okay, East Bremerton. And then this is Wilkinson in Gig Harbor. Have you been here, John? Have you ever seen this? I'm not saying you get everywhere, but you seem to be asking the right questions. I'll say that.
If you're talking about this, John, no.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, there are a lot of them today. Yeah, Wilkinson Park, fairly new in Gig Harbor. And then Kingston has a co-op. It's only if you live in Kingston, if there are any Kingstonites in today. And they do stuff like group buys of produce that they don't grow, and they have eggs and all kinds of stuff. So that's something I'd like to check out. There's also a similar thing on Bainbridge. It's called the Farmers and Gardeners Guild. They co-op grow all together, and they have chickens. And last year, I haven't checked with them lately, but last year they were looking to start a dairy goat guild. So they would have some of their people taking care of the dairy goats and some of them working on other projects and growing food together. And it says here, all skills appreciated. I think when I was given the example, she said, if you're really great at accounting, you can be a participant, because we need that too, right? We need all kinds of skills. And there is a link, of course, for it. And I'm gonna go see her on Tuesday, on the 12th, I think it is. So I'll tell you when I find out more. I know her, Heidi, it runs it. This is another one that is a way to get experience if you want it. This actually goes, 90% of the food goes to food banks. It's John Chang's farm. It's right in the middle of Bainbridge. And you get occasional gifts of food. I think that's the way, if you go out to work with him, then that's what you get. So you also don't have to commit to like once a week. You can just call him and say, I've got 2 hours this weekend. You want me to do something? And he'll be really glad to get 2 hours of work. So yeah, it's not an ongoing commitment even. Also, we need more pea patches. Do you have a neighbor who just doesn't really know what to do with their extra property next to their house or something? If you know anybody who's interested in producing one of these gardens where everybody gets a plot, Anita Rockefeller is willing to talk with you about how to start one and what the considerations are. Also, you can do informal arrangements. How do you do that? You definitely get to know your neighbors. You learn everything that you can about how to grow, even though you're not able to grow a lot yourself. And you help your friends, and you get to know your neighbors, and you just talk to people, talk to strangers. Hi, that's a gorgeous garden. And you go by, every day or whatever, and you end up talking with them. And it turns out it's too big for them, or they hurt their back, or they don't know how to take care of their fruit trees or something like that. And you can say, it's perfectly okay to say no to this, but I'm going to propose that I grow this stuff for you, or I prune these trees, or whatever it is that you know about, or I come help you weed because I don't know that much and I'd like to learn from you. And we can share the produce. So I know people who do that. I know somebody who grows all his veg that way, and he's done it many times over. Okay, so that's where you'll garden. Does anybody want to add anything to where you'll garden? Like any ideas that you had?
Carol, you didn't mention Battle Point, and the Parks Department has big pea
Oh my
patches.
gosh, I left Battle Point off. I have a picture of it and I lost it. I must have hit erase. Yes, Battle Point has a big pea patch. Yeah, community garden. Thank you so much for saying that. And if anybody's looking, well, I'll just write a note to myself. I have to make sure Battle Point's on the resource page. Yeah. Thank you.
Sure.
Miss Carol?
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, were you gonna provide John Chang's point of contact, phone number, or email?
Yes, it is. It's on the resource page. And if I'm wrong, can you get that and click on it? I'll check, make sure John Chang's on there. I'm sure that, yeah, I'm sure it is. I pasted it. I don't want to take the time to look for it right this minute, but I can also look at the end if you feel like reminding me. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, he's fun to work with. He's also my neighbor. I'm looking out the window at his house. He doesn't farm his house, but he's really cool. He's a really cool guy. I'm so pleased you want that information. Okay, so let's talk beds. What kind of beds can you have? You can have, I'm going to first differentiate between raised beds versus in-ground beds. This is a raised bed because it's more than 1 foot above the soil level. I'd call these raised beds, even though they're really giant stock tanks, they work like raised beds back here in the back. This, I'm not going to call that a raised bed because the advantages of raised beds do not extend to this short of a bed. I'm going to call this an in-ground bed with wood around it. So the advantages of raised beds is that if you have an area that does not dry out in your garden until like May, first of all, make sure it's not a protected wetland, but if it just stays wet, you could put a raised bed on it and you can get a head start because the bed drains better. Also, it can warm up in the spring faster, especially on its south side. It'll warm up a little faster. It, you know, it's contained. People kind of like that it's contained. And you also don't have to spend so much time in a crouch over it, although you still kind of have to bend over them. So check out these kind of raised beds. Let's look at this first. If you are in a wheelchair or you have a back that will not let you bend over, you can have this kind of little raised bed. I'll tell you, those are the advantages. The considerations are that it's quite shallow. They do make some that are a lot deeper, but I don't know a lot of people who have those. Soil is super heavy when it's wet. So you want to make sure that the slats on the bottom are like at least screwed on, bolted on, whatever. And it should be really substantial because making legs out of one bias is not going to do it. So you want a really sturdy big thing. And the things you can grow in here are like lettuce. You could probably do basil at least you could grow herbs of various kinds, lettuce, strawberries. And that's the kind of stuff you can do. Tomatoes, nope, they need a really deep, big container. You also, even if you have in-ground beds, a consideration is that you're going to have to buy the wood. And it is not recommended to use treated lumber. And the best thing is cedar around here because it is somewhat rot resistant, but you will still, after 6 years to 8 years, generally have to replace that. So some people do love that and they don't think it's any problem, and some people don't want to have to replace it. If I had a whole bunch of just fir that was 2 inches thick, or even 1 inch thick, and I had a ton of it and I had no cash in my pocket at the time, I would make probably a raised bed out of that. but I would know that it was only going to last me maybe 3 years before I had to come up with some other solution. Raised beds are really great for controlling a hill that would otherwise erode, or you want to put vegetables on there. It's a great sunny spot, but you've got the slope and the water won't soak in because it just rolls down in the summer. So this is a great way to do it. You could make raised beds out of logs. Sometimes people are giving away logs around here. See that they are pinned into the ground like this. They're supported by these guys. Those would rot off really easily here, so I wouldn't use those. I'd use rebar myself. And I would put rebar on the outside here, and I'd put 1 or 2 rebar on the inside so that the logs don't fall inward as well. And you do get a little bit of soil leakage and stuff out, but it eventually settles and it's okay. So here are in-ground beds. So that was raised beds. In-ground beds, you can have them with wood around the edges. I've never done that for an in-ground bed. You can have them with no wood. This person took the fluffy topsoil out of their pathways, tossed it over here to make a little bit raised beds. So really, these are technically slightly raised. And then they put chips, wood chips in the pathways. Don't put wood chips on your beds unless you're a permaculturist, and that's an entirely different matter. So this person can plant food in here. These are beds that were just sliced out of the lawn. That is very early spring in my front yard, in fact. So it looks better when it fills in, but it is perfectly acceptable. And when they're empty, I tell people I buried very tall relatives there. Okay. So in-ground beds, yeah, thank you. So how do you get rid of the lawn? A lot of times it's smart to get rid of things that have tap roots. So this is dock. A taproot plant, when you cut it off, even if you cut it off deeply, will come back, 2 inches down, it'll come back eventually. But you can get out as much of it as you can. So dandelions and dock. I like to get rid of this buttercup stuff as well if I can. Love a flat shovel like this. These people have decided to put in a raised bed here, I think, but it would work for a dug bed as well. They've cut around it with the blade of the shovel. I like to cut it into like 1-foot chunks as well, cutting straight down across. And then they just shove the shovel underneath there and remove this. And then you can compost the lawn. You want to make sure that you turn the pieces upside down so that nothing green is sticking out, because you want that to die off and compost. I even grab the green stuff by its grassy little hair and pick it up and smash it against the side of the shovel so that some soil falls back into the ground. There are people who do it differently. There is a link on the resource page to a suggestion that you could cover this entire area with cardboard, like 3 layers of thick cardboard, and then just pile what's called raised bed mix, probably in these bags, where you want the beds. So they are sloped, they're curved beds, gently sloped on the sides. I frankly like to flatten the top out somewhat because I want to grow food up there. And so on top of the cardboard, you have this soil. And then where you want the pathways, you use 3 to 4 inches of chips, wood chips. So your goal is that every bit of plant in your lawn will get covered up. I haven't done it that way before. I do the remove the lawn method, but Anne Lovejoy wrote us an article about how to do it, and there is a link to that. Tips for beds. Don't make them any wider than 4 feet. Do you see these people? They're young people, live young people who can reach into the middle of the beds. But eventually, if you're a persistent gardener, you're going to be an old gardener, and you probably don't want to be leaning across a 5-foot bed to get to the middle of it. And you do spend a lot of time doing that if you're gardening. And what else? Fill it. Look at this bed on the right. These folks thought, well, we'll leave 6 inches of wood showing, but then it settled another 6 inches. So they kind of wasted that upper part. of the wood. And now the plants don't have the root space there anymore. They could have built a shorter one, but what they can do instead is put more raised bed mix into it in the future. So it's gonna settle. I wouldn't overfill it. I would go like an inch from the top when you fill it up, and it'll settle. And then the following year, I tend to put a little bit more in. You put your climbers and tall plants on the back, and that is the north end of the bed, because the sun's going to come in this way and hit your plants, and you don't want to have them back here in the shade. Some national planting guides will tell you to put your lettuce behind your cucumbers. I guess you can do that. I don't find that necessary here, but then again, I have an area where they can get morning sun and then afternoon shade. So you might want to stick something back there, but generally it's too dark so we want our climbers and tall plants on the north end. That includes beans and peas and cucumbers. Make sure your paths are wide enough for you to kneel in. So this guy is demonstrating to us that his little tiny path is really uncomfortable because he has to have his ankles on the other bed, and maybe he would squish up baby plants if he was doing that. Also, it's nice to be able to get a wheelbarrow in and out. So if you need to turn your wheelbarrow around in order to get it out, you want to have enough room for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, John, what's up?
Oh, sorry, talking to my wife.
Oh, it's okay. Oh, okay, that's fine. Okay.
I do have a
Anyway.
question though about, so I'm building a second bed and it's 7 feet by 7 feet. So
Mhm.
I guess I should put like a maybe a board or something like that, a 12-inch wide board in the middle of it so I can divide it in half.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah. And then
Yeah, then you can get right in there.
so where I'm putting it on the lawn, the lawn is sloped. It's got kind of a heavy duty slope where one side is raised up maybe about 6 or 7 inches over on the other side. And I was going to dig out that grass. So from what I'm hearing you saying, I should take chunks of that grass and pull that grass away and put it someplace else and then dig up that dirt instead of just trying to dig up the grass.
Yeah, I wouldn't turn the grass in because it just keeps coming back.
Okay, thank you.
And yours is not a raised bed, right? It's in the ground.
Well, no, it is. It'll be about 14 inches high, the wood.
Okay. I would even dig into the upper level of the soil, the uphill side. I would dig that down and try to get that bed as level as possible. Do you know what I
Yes,
mean?
that's the plan. That's the plan.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. That's cool.
Great.
Sounds good. I'm looking forward to finding out what happens for you. That's nice.
Thank you.
Okay. And I really appreciate the questions and comments. And I would say keep your garden size flexible. If you build yourself a $7,000 fence around your teeny tiny garden, and then you decide you are more of a gardener than you thought, and you can't move the fence, I'm not saying you couldn't move that picture. That one looks pretty mobile, but sometimes people really commit, like they put a patio around the whole thing, and then they wish they had a little more space because they're good at it. And they end up thinking, well, I also want to grow corn. So they stuff that in, and pumpkins, and they stuff that in. And it all gets too crowded and it's not successful and they give up. So I would say start yourself with your 3 beds or your 1 bed or whatever, and then think, do I have the back strength and the interest and, and where else would I like to grow something? And then you can sort of add. I did mine that way. I did not do all the beds at once. I started with like 2 beds, and then every spring and every fall, I added a bed or 2. Containers. You do not have to have ground at all. I just want to get your creative juices going here about what containers you can use. These are the insides of commercial dryers from a laundromat. And this is the biggest lettuce I've ever seen in a teeny tiny pot. I bet this person has to water it twice a day and once a week gives it a liquid fertilizer, but you can hang pots. It's possible. I like this one on the fence, even though they're tiny, and I would probably only grow herbs in there or maybe strawberries. I like this because I once had a house that shaded the entire garden right up to the fence, but the fence was in the sun just mocking me. So I wish I'd had this. One thing I would say about this is these 2x4s are holding the containers up. It's not really the fence that's doing it. It'll pull your fence down because this wood and soil, once it gets wet, will pull it down. It's just tacked to the fence or screwed onto the fence for stability, but the 2x4s are what's holding it up. And this one, I don't know if I agree with this in terms of chemicals in your food, but it made me laugh. This is, now everybody always asks me to repeat this, a salad bar from the 80s from a Pizza Hut. And the person decided, well, that's trash, but I'm going to turn it into an herb garden. So it might not be the ideal, I don't know what chemicals are in that plastic, but I thought it was very creative. I'm going to try to move on here. Tips for growing things in containers. Let's see. They need holes in the bottom. I forgot to tell a friend once and she drowned her tomatoes and she's still years later sad about it. They need more frequent watering. If you have a plant that's really successful and it's filled that pot up with tons and tons of roots, those roots are like straws, little straws. And if it's in a hot place and it's a really productive big tomato, it may need water twice a day. And you know whether or not it needs it because you stick your finger in there. And if it's dry beyond like your first knuckle, then it needs water. Or if it's showing water stress, like it's turning yellow or something. Okay. You're going to fertilize containers with soluble organic fertilizer at the peak warm growth summertime. You're going to want to give them a drink of that every week because containers don't have as much nutrient in them because it's a limited space. Big and deep is better for bigger plants, especially. They always say tomatoes can grow in a 5-gallon bucket. They can, but you will feel like more of a genius if you put them in a 10-gallon, and 30 gallons is all the better. Tomatoes would love big roots everywhere. 30 gallons can be hard to find, but it's possible. If you have a shallow pot and you want to be able to move it around, you don't want a big, deep pot, the commitment of that because it's heavy. Lettuce and strawberries and herbs will work in those pots, but they need that same care as the other ones. So what are we going to put in the bed? Because you can just dig a hole and grow and put a seed in it, says John, but you could even put some stuff in that will make the plants happier. So if you have raised beds or pots, you're going to fill them with a raised bed and potting mix. Sometimes it just says raised bed mix. Sometimes a local producer will call it Garden Delight, and you have to say, is that for raised beds? And they have to say to you, yes, because it has some sand in it for drainage and compost, and it usually has some loamy soil as well. So that's what you're looking for. Ask your garden, if you buy it in bags, especially ask your garden expert at the nursery, do I need to add compost? And they usually tell you you do, because these are a bit lean. They're a bit like, they're just not very rich soil sometimes. And you do have to add fertilizer and mix it into the top 8 inches. So a fertilizer that you might want to use is down to earth fertilizer. You don't have to use this, but people ask me for like a brand recommendation. There's also one called Dr. Earth, but down to earth works as well, and it's a little bit less expensive. There's also another one I think called, now I can't remember. It's not Edna's Best. But anyway, there's a recommendation. That's in your first year. In your second year, you can add an inch of compost and fertilizer again, according to the box instructions, because the plants will have pulled the fertilizer out in order to use it for your vegetables. And in future years after that, you can get a soil test, and we'll talk about that in a couple of months. Oh, and you do not have to rototill your soil. It's even better for your soil if you do this with a hand fork, like a garden fork. It's a really sturdy, big thing to loosen your soil as deeply as you can, but that's actually for in-ground beds. So for in-ground beds, you're going to take the plants that are there out. Don't turn the grass under and the weeds under because they'll come back. So I would scrape them off. Loosen your existing soil as deeply as you can. It says 18 to 24 inches. Around here, I hit glacial rock about 8 inches down. So I never have gotten down to 24. So this person's going to fork as deeply as they can go and then just pull back on it to loosen the soil. You don't have to smash it and pulverize it. And then gently turn into the top 6 to 8 inches of soil, some balanced fertilizer, and 2 to 4 inches of compost. Honestly, you should actually put this stuff on before you start loosening and the soil, because you'll have less work to do. If you put the compost and the fertilizer on, and then you loosen and work it in a little bit. And in the second year, you can add another inch of compost. After you get going, you can just add like a half an inch. But your second year, you can put an inch in and fertilizer every spring. And then again, you do not have to rototill the heck out of it. I just want to point out this. We have compost or raised bed mix, whichever you are buying. You can buy in bags, and you can also have it delivered, and you can also go get it yourself. So the worst compost that you could possibly buy in bags, if you buy a yard of it, which is 3 feet tall by 3 feet wide by 3 feet deep, will cost you $75, and it's hardly worth that. It's not, the cheapest stuff is not so good. But you can spend up to $240 for that 1 yard of compost. But if you have it delivered from a local producer, 40 to 98, depending on what kind you get. And then if you go pick it up, you can get really low per yard. So I have a table on the resource page that says, here's where you can get these things. And one is in bags, it's just an example. And one is, and there are like 3 local suppliers, at least 2 of which, I think all of them make their own. And it does contain other people's yard waste. So some people say, they might have put an herbicide or a pesticide on their plants. And that would, if that's a concern for you, you might want to go with the bag stuff, because the bag stuff doesn't usually contain yard waste. But our local producers are careful about testing for things. So bagged products don't usually have yard waste. There is a local source called Olympic Organics. They use town and country vegetable trim and yard waste and some manure, but they test for these 2 persistent herbicides that can wreck your garden. They test, and they also grow food in every load of compost that they make. So they can test specifically for those herbicides, because those herbicides won't let your garden grow. And then there's Ole Mountain Fish compost, which is, last I heard, just wood waste and fish. And then Vern's sells, which is on 305, sells something called Purdy Prep. And I called them, and they do use yard waste, but they say it's chemical free. So personally, I'm using Olympic Organics lately. I like that they use a town and country veg trim too, and keep it in the community, in the, support reuse and recycling. Yep.
Carol, Indigo on, I forget if it's Columbia or Port Gamble Road, but the road between Squamish and Port Gamble also has the Olympic seafood stuff, or the
Olympic Organics or the fish one?
The fish stuff.
Oh, okay. It's called Indigo.
Indigo, yeah.
Good. Okay.
At least they did last year. I assume they're going to again this year.
Okay. I'm going to look that up. Making a note. Okay. So this is math that you can do to figure out how much you need, how many feet you need. A yard is 27 feet. It's a cubic yard. But you have a 4-foot bed that's 8 feet wide and 1 foot tall. That's 32 feet. So you need more than a yard. You need 1.2 yards, in fact. But if you, I want you to do all your math by hand. I really do. I do it myself. It's good for you, like eating your vegetables. But you can also find calculators online, like Olympic, Olympic Organics has one at their site. A lot of times they'll have a link to a calculator, and you decide what you need. And that would be if you were filling the whole bed, then you would have the depth of the bed. But if you were just putting 4 inches of compost on, then that is 1/3 of a foot, right? Oh, there, have it in inches. Yeah, so you just put 3 inches in there, 4 inches, whatever you're using. So amendments are composty things. So before you dig, grab some of your soil and give it a squeeze and then poke it. And it should crumble apart easily. It shouldn't fall apart to dust when you open your hand, but also when you poke it, it shouldn't be like wet clay. So we're looking for something that is dry enough to fall apart, but moist enough not to fall apart right when you open your hand. So that we should not work in wet soil. You can dry and warm your soil early if you're very eager, or if we have a really wet spring. You can take transparent, clear, colorless plastic, maybe from the trash, maybe from something you got in the mail, and you can put it over the bed. Sometimes I do this just for where I want to put peas down, because peas we plant really early. And I put rocks along the corners, and then it lets the sun in and it keeps the rain out. And it ends up drying it just enough and warming it just a couple of degrees so that I can get my peas going. And I would hand dig, do not wreck your soil. And you should definitely come to the soil talk, which is, I'm going to say May. You'd have to look at the schedule. I can't remember which one. But there is an ecosystem in your soil. It wants to help you. And if you're going to dig your garden, I would loosen the soil and then gently turn things in. And you can have chunks of compacted, you can have chunks of your original soil in your mix. You do not have to get it all pulverized. It will eventually work and become more homogeneous for you. If you're going to make your own compost from manure, ask me about herbicides before you do that. Okay, so if you can't build a fence because you're a renter, or who wants a fence? You don't want one, it's your front yard. You can use one of these. I find them very effective against deer. I haven't really tried them against rabbits. I just pretty much cover up the bed against rabbits. But John, you said it worked against deer, but not rabbits, right? John Fawcett.
Yeah, it's very effective against deer. The rabbit thing, not so much.
Yeah.
We only used it for part-time last year. We actually just fenced everything because it was easier.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go. I like them. Fencing is, if you can do it, that's good, right? This is something you can do if you have a lot of rabbits. This is concrete reinforcing wire. It's a 6-inch square. It's not fencing. Fencing's too squishy. It's not hog panel or stock panel. That's too hard and it's super expensive. This stuff should be between 10 and 15 bucks for a 4x8 panel. Maybe it's 10 bucks for a 4x8. And next month, I'll show you how to make these. But they are very effective, super lightweight. They move around, they don't blow away. They're really great. So
I made some out of
oh, sorry.
I made some out of welded wire too. It's not stiff like you said of the hog panels, but it's
Yeah, this is
another option
welded
too.
wire.
Oh, okay, okay,
Yeah. Yeah, I'm saying not hog panels. This is welded wire.
okay.
Yeah.
I thought it
This
was the
happens to be remesh.
Is it the galvanized stuff? Because the concrete stuff is not galvanized, right?
Sometimes it is. I have some that's galvanized.
Oh, okay.
But was yours galvanized?
Mine was galvanized, yes.
And do you like it better if it's galvanized?
Yeah, just to keep the rust off it and the hands clean when you're moving around.
Yeah, that's true. I can't move it if I'm wearing like my Sunday best. Okay, thanks. Okay, here are a few tips for how to feel like a food growing genius. Plant at the right time. Everything on the left likes cool weather. It can tolerate our heat, but it's the stuff that you want to plant in April because it can tolerate the cool. So anything related to a cabbage, lettuces and carrots and beets, they're all cool. But the things on the right, see all those things that are fruits with seeds in them? They want heat. So we wait to plant those. In fact, we usually do the starts for these in the house for tomatoes and squash and sunflowers and peppers under lights, or we go to the nursery and we buy those. So choose this at the right time. Choose to plant them at the right time. Don't plant your tomatoes in April. But you're going to need a planting calendar. And I would not use a national planting calendar because it puts us sometimes in the wrong zone, and it doesn't really, it'll say something that the whole country should do, but it's not what we should do. And I'm going to skip this one because I'm trying to save a little bit of time, but I have a planting calendar. I have 2 of them for you. Let's see. I'll show you this. I may kick myself out of this slideshow, but we'll see what happens. My favorite one is this one. And the reason I like it is it doesn't say plant your beets somewhere between April and August, right? Some planting calendars are very, very liberal, I guess, loose. But he says, here's what works for me. So he says, start your eggplant inside around April 1st. And that's only if you have lights, by the way. If you started broccoli or cauliflower indoors in February, move it to the garden. He tells you what to do in the first half of April. Sometimes he'll even say, plant carrots on the 1st of July if you want them for winter. And then I can see what he does, and I'm free to do it a month earlier or a month later if I want to. He's not a dictator, but he does let me know what really works. If I instead see that I can plant them in April all the way through August, if I plant them in August, it might not work, might be too late. So I like that one. But I do have a link to a more general one that tells you bigger planting windows as well if you want. But I really like that guy. He's local. Choose Northwest adapted varieties, especially for your warm weather crops. Where are we going to get them? Look at all of these. I have a table full of these seed companies. They are breeding seeds and selling them for the Northwest US. So there are lots of different seed sources, and they're on your resource page. It tells you what's special about them, and it gives you a link. And you can get some of these at our local nurseries as well, but you might want to take a look at them. So Northeastern catalogs work as well. Like I have one that I like that's in Vermont and one that's in Maine. They have quite different weather, but they're at our same similar latitude. But in any catalog, what you can look for is these terms. If it says, this corn has really good cool soil emergence, or this tomato really tolerates cool nights, then those are going to be adaptive for us. So if you have a plant that you are looking at in a catalog and you say, it's so great, I really want to grow this tomato, check for these kinds of words to help yourself have more success. But the Northwest growers are really working for us as well. And so they have some really great varieties that have been tested in this area. Also, give them space. We tend to plant things too close together. I think I know what happened. This person right here should have a cabbage that is as big as this one and as sweet as this one. But I bet this is very peppery and a little bit sulfuric tasting. And I think what happened is she did what we all do. She bought a 6-pack or he bought a 6-pack of cabbages and couldn't bear to kill any of them. So put them all into this teeny tiny little area with soil. And if they had put one cabbage in, it would have been bigger and sweeter. And you would know that you can grow a big cabbage. So if your plants are coming out tiny, they probably don't have enough food, possibly enough water maybe, or enough space, because really food and water come out of the soil. So they have to have that space in order to get the food and water that they need.
Carol.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, I got a question. I'm sorry, I can't find the hand icon.
No,
Cabbage.
that's fine.
Every year
Yeah.
that I've grown cabbage, they've been assaulted by slugs. Every year, without fail.
Mm-hmm.
What can I do to get rid of the slugs other than pesticides?
Well, Western Washington, the university, Western Washington University says, in Western Washington, we mitigate slugs, we do not eliminate them. So don't feel bad that you still have a lot of slugs, because they are part of our ecosystem, and they're just like, it's like fish in the sea. This is their favorite ecosystem, right? And so you're not doing something wrong. Do you have holes in some of the leaves, or are you not able to harvest a cabbage because it's just chewed up?
Yeah, I'm not able to harvest them. They're just through and through riddled.
Are they Napa cabbage, or are they like German kind of, cabbage?
They're the
Big
regular,
ball cabbage,
the regular
regular
greenish.
cabbages.
Looks like a bowling ball.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Do they grow big, but they get eaten anyway?
Yes.
Do
Okay.
do the slugs make it into the center of the? Because I always figure every cabbage I grow, I gotta throw off like a half an inch of the outside. Do they
Yes,
make it to the
they
center?
get into the inside. They do. They get into the inside of it.
I've never had that happen. I've always just shed
Yeah.
off the outside pieces and good to go in the middle.
Yeah. So John McInnes, how many outside leaves do you take off the cabbage head? Like
Oh, it
6,
depends. Depends. I
8?
mean, I still have some in the refrigerator from last year that I pulled out
Yeah.
yesterday. I opened up a head and I took off like 3 layers. I didn't see any slugs. I tend
Mhm.
to get those off when I pull them out of the garden, but I've never had, and I've grown hundreds of them at a time before. I've never had them get any past about a half an inch, maybe.
Mm.
Have you gone into the center, John, of
What do you
your
mean?
eaten cabbages? You're saying you've got slugs all the way to the middle?
Yes.
Okay.
Well,
You
the slugs
can
are
set
not
up.
slugs are not a boring type of pest. They're a I don't know, they slime through the outside. And in my experience, they've always been on the outside leaves. I've never seen them bore to the middle. Of other things can bore to the middle, but not really slugs.
Yeah,
Hmm.
John, are you sure you've seen actual slugs in there?
Well, they look like slugs.
Okay. That's
So if they're not slugs,
that's
I'm not sure what they are, but they look,
yeah.
smell, and crawl like slugs.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Um, hmm. Let me think. Do they, so, you can,
But I,
something that people do a lot is hand pick. They just watch their cabbages and they just keep hand picking slugs off. Maybe don't mulch them, because that gives the slugs a place to live. If you
okay.
have plants around your garden bed that have a lot of slugs in them, you might want to plant your cabbages somewhere with fewer plants around that garden bed, because the slugs can just be moving in from the rest of the garden area. You can put them in a raised bed. That sometimes helps. You could beer trap the heck out of it, but I think beer trapping, you can look up how to make beer traps. You're basically inviting the slugs to drown themselves in beer. And if you do a ton of that right now, you will mitigate that slug problem. But if you have a whole garden that has a ton of slugs in it, they're just going to keep coming. So they do say hand picking at night, which just seems irritating, right? But that can really help.
The European
So
the European cabbage worm also kind of looks like a slug, so that might be also
yeah.
what you might be dealing with.
All right. Well, what I might do this year is plant them in those little kitty swimming pools. I have about 4 or 5 of them. I buy them for my dog. She chews them up, puts
Mhm.
holes in them. So I'm just use those this year.
Oh, that's an interesting idea, to keep them up and out of the way.
Yeah, I'll try it.
And John McInnes was saying you might want to look up cabbage worm and cabbage looper.
Okay, sure.
One of them is brown. So loopers are green, right, John McInnes? I never bothered to think about the difference. I think the European cabbage worm is what he said. It's not really slug-like, but
the loopers are a little thinner and they actually kind of make an arch shape when they're moving or whatever. The European cabbage worm the European cabbage literally looks like a small slug. And I can't remember the
if that's
color.
what you have, those you hand pick. You just look for them and pick them off.
Yeah, and they come from a fly or a whatever moth or whatever, but so they're coming from the air. So getting them under control isn't necessarily from the ground side.
Yeah, that's true. So you might look up those pictures and see if that's what they look like.
Okay.
And then in that case, you're looking for white eggs on the underside of the cabbage leaves.
Oh,
and
okay.
you want to get them off. Yeah. And also looking for, anyway, we have I think it's May, we have a pest class that's coming up. So this image is just to show you that plants that you think don't have very big roots have a lot of roots. So read the package, and if it tells you to thin them to 10 inches apart, not these specifically, but whatever it is, then thin them to that far apart. It's hard to kill them, but that's nature's way. They plant a lot of seeds, and then some of them get eaten by deer and stuff. So yeah, those are real drawings, by the way, of actual roots. So I just want to show you this on the Brussels sprout packet. It says that when you plant it, not useful, you're supposed to plant them 2 inches apart. And then they grow, and we're so happy and we're so excited, and we know we have to thin them, but we've lost the packet. So we don't know how far apart they should be. But look, they're supposed to be 2 feet apart. You have to pull out most of those. And I want to show you what happens when you do and when you don't thin. So these Brussels sprouts were not thinned, and they have not been able to grow, so pests have been able to eat them, and they couldn't outgrow the pests. These Brussels sprouts are what Brussels sprouts are supposed to look like. That's 3 Brussels sprout plants and a little bit of kale. So that's a happy plant, and those are plants that have been given plenty of space. Okay. And you don't have to plant in rows. Often the packet will say plant 6 inches apart in rows 3 feet apart. And you think, I want to plant like this, like cookies on a cookie sheet. Well, what you do is you add 36 inches, because that's the 3 part, 3 feet is 36, plus 6 inches apart, that's 42. And then you divide it in half and you get 21. And that means the center of this plant should be 21 inches from the center of that plant, not in between, but center to center. And that can give you spacing. And then keep them happy. Make sure that you're watering them appropriately. You don't have to drown them, but you can water them. Don't let the water, the ground completely dry out, and keep them mulched. I mulch after the rains stop, because if I do it before the rains stop, I get more slugs eating my baby plants. Let's see what else we have. And you can grow little bits instead of big crops. This person planted all the lettuce in the packet and is going to have to eat that within 2 weeks because it could bolt. This person planted bits of little things. You can even plant lettuce every 3 weeks, a little bit of lettuce every 3 weeks, and then it matures a little bit at a time, and then you have all you need. And we're going to learn more about that. It's called succession planting, so you can get multiple crops out of your plants, out of your garden in one season and gain weeks of time in your growing season. You can get extra crops by doing what's called succession planting. So next time we're talking succession planting, and we're going to learn how to grow earlier, faster, and longer with protection, different kinds of protection for our garden. So that is what's happening. Are we at the end? Oh, I have lists of things you can do now in your garden on the resource page. If you currently have, I'm just going to point out a couple of them. If you have cabbage, Brussels sprouts, kale, and things like that growing right now, and you think, well, I've got to rip these things out. Wait, because they will start to make blossoms. And before the blossoms open, you can pick them all off. They look like teeny tiny broccolis, really skinny little broccolis. And you toss them with olive oil and salt and roast them at 400 degrees in your oven for a few minutes, and they are delicious. If you don't have your garden yet, there are lots of things you can do. You can sun map and do all the things that we talked about today, and then you'll be ready. And we're going to meet back here in March to learn how to make enclosures to keep your heat lovers happier and to help your early growing. And it also says reduce slug damage, and how to overlap your plantings so that you can have more in your garden. And I think that is all I'm going to tell you tonight.